Once more, DC Comics is playing with Batman's origins and his parents' deaths, or they seem to be. Let the dead rest. Once more, they're playing with Joe Chill and the events leading up to the infamous shooting in Crime Alley. And yes, the phrasing once more is accurate. Batman has a long history of people playing with his origin in various ways. This 2024 attempt coming out of Detective Comics comes from the DC All-In Initiative. So that's part of the mainline version of canon, not the absolute universe, which time of recording are things that are both unfolding simultaneously. So we're looking at regular old Batman, small Batman, not Bruce Thickerman and his Bat-Dozer. Over in the main books, this initiative saw some creative teams switch up, and also most of the main plot lines wrap up and some new ones start, or rather some new threads pick up. Detective Comics was being written by Rom V. Now the writing duties are falling to Tom Taylor, and the art is by Mikel Janin. The arc, so far, is a couple of things, but for the main present part of the storyline is that Batman's getting too old for this. He's got some Dark Knight Rises knee problems and other things. He's struggling to handle crimes. He's making bad decisions. We're gonna leave that part of the plot alone because that could be a discussion unto itself, how that's being handled. But there are two parts to this story, and they will most likely interconnect at some point, so it's good to know the base that he's contemplating performance-enhancing drugs. Again, I guess it's been many years since the Venom. Maybe the offerings are better now. There's also a whole other discussion that's happening there as to whether or not injecting that level of verisimilitude of Batman aging, whether it's a discussion that adds to the story or it takes away in a way that it can hurt some of the suspension of disbelief and call into question certain things that people are just kind of holding in their heads in terms of, people's ages, realism, that kind of thing, whether the story is worth that or not. So that's a whole other discussion. But again, we're here for the tweaks or seeming tweaks to the origin, which have yet to be fully unveiled, but they're starting to, and that leads into a fascinating discussion of, is Batman's origin something that at this point should just be left alone? Are there more details that could really enhance it at this point? I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and let's talk about it. We're going to be taking a look at Detective Comics 1090. Batman bracing for impact on the cover. This arc is called Mercy of the Father, which means it's once more time to look at Thomas Wayne. It's a play on sins of the father. The flip from sin to mercy may impact the theming. Hopefully this time he doesn't backhand Bruce across the face. Batman 430, never forget. This is a story that has multiple points in time and starts off 3 weeks from now. But then it cuts to many years ago. But when it comes out of the flashbacks from many years ago, it then says present day rather than now. No, it should say now because the opening was 3 weeks from now. Or is present day not now? Don't try and trip me up, comic, it's too early. What we largely need for our purposes so far is in the past. Thomas Wayne is awakened at work and he needs to rush into surgery. There's been a car accident, a young man with his pregnant girlfriend, and it's triggered labor in her. However, the boyfriend was abusive, and so Thomas's colleague just straight up encourages him to let him die. What do you see? Her injuries? Some of the bruising is older than the accident. He beat her. I'd say the boyfriend's chances of survival would be 0 if you weren't here. But I am here. Thomas, make sure he's prepped for surgery. We'll pretend this conversation didn't happen. I mean, that doctor could have not woken Thomas up if he felt that strongly. This is the big source of conflict going forward for this issue and potentially beyond it. Thomas keeping his oath and also not wanting to let a person die versus making what some other characters feel would be the correct moral judgment. It's a conflict that relies on the reader getting emotionally invested in the proceedings, specifically on behalf of the victim/survivor. In a way, she could feel a bit like a prop. Her state is meant to evoke an emotional reaction in the reader to try and put them into the counter stance the book requires for the conflict to have some weight. Because a lot of the moral dilemma that's being set up hinges on that happening. So far, again, it could get way more complex, but as it stands, it's not at the moment. For in this intro to it, if one ends up feeling that Thomas should just do his job, or perhaps feels that the emotional call to action is a bit too blatant, then much of the poignance of this moment may fall flat. However, if one is already engaging, then it could come across as more compelling. Mileage varies. She's asked to see you before you leave. They told me he's gonna live because of you. It was a team effort, really. You have to save lives? You took an oath? I did. Then he has to think I lost the baby. Evelyn. I know the police told the hospital who he is and what he's done. He's a criminal. He's a animal. And he's alive because of you. His child has to go away. You're supposed to save lives. You'd be saving this one. That is an excellent drawing of a baby. What a great baby. It's got that post-birth scrunch face. Even the head is still kind of a little coned. These are some nice details. Now, Thomas is moved by this, as is Martha, who comes in to get the woman and her child away. Thomas has explained the situation. I work with a number of services in the city, adoption and foster agencies, but I also fund a number of women's refuges across the country. What you're suggesting is selfless and brave, and I understand it completely. There is nothing I wouldn't do for my own child. I understand your fear, but I can protect you both from him. I promise. We can move you tonight. How much will it cost? That's not something you need to worry about. You should give your child a name, Evelyn. You're gonna spend a lot of time together. So okay, here we are. The man was saved. The woman, she's gonna be moved out. She's not gonna have to pay for it. She's gonna get away from him. They're gonna hide her, and they've got the resources to do it. Yet that argument from earlier that Thomas should have just let the man die comes back up, and this time it's Martha who brings it up at home. The argument itself is fairly bare bones. It boils down to outright stating the base of the conflict at each other. What you're capable of borders on miraculous, but did he deserve your miracle? You saw what he did to her. He's a monster. My Hippocratic oath didn't come with an asterisk, Martha. Now this is happening in this setting so that Bruce has occasion to hear his father's stance. So it can be part of a moment that impacts how he approaches things as an adult, as Batman. And if we can save a life and we don't, what would that make us? You saved the life, Bruce. No matter what. Batman, Bruce Wayne, has long been shown to be influenced and impacted by his father in particular, down to the very costume that he wears. So the idea that his father's beliefs and him being a doctor and how he enacted that would impact him is not a foreign one. What's happening here is just a bit more blatant. It's aiming for a heavy emotional payoff because it's building to what's meant to be a shocking reveal. Spoiler territory if you don't want to know. At the end of the issue, it's shown that the man that Thomas Wayne saved was, get ready for it, Joe Chill. Dun, dun, dun. There have been a variety of reactions to this, and there's also been some play in terms of coverage of it, saying that it changes everything. Then there's some people who are more for it, more against it. So let's examine, because it's interesting, not only this moment, but just the discussion around Batman's origins. So to fully discuss this, we need to look at Batman's origin and its evolution and Thomas and Joe Chill's place within it. And we're going to be doing this looking at the mainline universe, so not the Elseworlds or quasi-Elseworlds things. 3 Jokers just popped into my head. And you also have the Absolute Universe that's currently doing its own thing where he has a modified origin. Now, while Batman debuted in Detective Comics 27, his origin was first shown in Detective Comics 33 in 1939, the issue after he shoots a vampire. And a lot of it was essentially the same as what people know today. Like much of Batman's early lore, this story was by Bill Finger. Legend, the Batman, and how he came to be. Some 15 years ago, Thomas Wayne, his wife, and son were walking home from a movie. What is this? And a stick up, buddy. I'll take the necklace you're wearing, lady. Leave her alone, you gunshot. You asked for it. Thomas, you've killed him. Help, police, help. This'll shut you up. The boy's eyes are wide with terror and shock as the horrible scene is spread before him. Father, mother, they're dead. They're dead. Days later, a curious and strange scene takes place. And I swear by the spirits of my parents to avenge their deaths by spending the rest of my life warring on all criminals. Then we get the rest of the montage. He trains, he gets good at science, he gets swole, he calls criminals a superstitious and cowardly lot, a bat flies through his window, he becomes Batman. Now, a lot of this has remained the same. The Waynes, walking home from a movie, accosted by a criminal, parents killed, Bruce sees it happen, it has this huge impact on him, he makes a vow. There's a lot that works right out of the gate. Bruce is a child who is the victim of a tragedy who vows never to let it happen again, turning his pain into some kind of war on crime. In this first outing in the Golden Age, there's more of a vengeance aspect present, which is going to be tapered down as you'll see over time. That's why you have so much of that in, say, the Golden Age inspired Caped Crusader. But one of the key things here that tends to remain the same, although this is one of the things that's tweaked that causes some of the consternation, but in this first origin is that what happened to him could have happened to anybody. It's wrong place, wrong time. And while Bruce had the means at his disposal to become a vigilante and has more resources to get cool gadgets and the like, he was still a victim, and it was something that could make him more relatable, not less. The idea that even with all this wealth and privilege, tragedy could still strike and completely alter and derail someone's life. Now, this origin did have much room to play around in terms of details. Martha doesn't even have a name. It's no wonder Batman's so hung up on it. Say her name.
Why did you say that name?
And more details would be added, like the movie they were going to and the like. But one of the questions that people seem more keen, particularly on the creative side, to latch onto, even in the Golden Age, was who killed the Waynes and why? The thing with Batman's origin is that so strong at base and instrumental into how Bruce was shaped, that when changing it, the question becomes what is adding to the character and what is potentially taking away, because so much is already established from the first outing. Now, the evolution of changes in the Golden Age came fairly naturally because a lot of the characters were evolving as they went, which does still happen, but in the Golden Age at the start, they were very malleable and then things would be added and they would cement more. So it is by the Silver Age that the characters that survive into it have backstories that are more concrete, even though there will still be changes and the like that are introduced, but more so to other characters than to Batman. Batman's origin is retold in Batman #1 in 1940, and it's basically the same, only now it's moved from saying legend to a big splash page declaring that this is how he came to be, so it's definitive. However, in this origin, there's still the mystery of who killed Bruce's parents and why. This question will be returned to by one of Batman's creators, Bill Finger. This in 1948, in Batman 47. The mugger is revealed to be Joe Chill. Bill Finger crafts the story in The Origin of Batman, wherein Bruce gets the opportunity to confront Joe Chill, who is then presented as a lower-level crime boss. And they really drive home the emotional impact that this had on him, even in the splash teaser page. Have you ever wondered why Bruce Wayne, a society blue blood, chose the dangerous career of Batman? What made him become a relentless, hard-hitting crime fighter? How did he train himself in athletic and scientific skill until he became the nemesis of the Joker, the Penguin, Catwoman, and other nefarious criminals of our time? What inspired the Batmobile and the Batplane? Here's the answer. The inside story of a boy who made a grim vow. The inside story of the origin of the Batman. That panel of the Batman shadow looming behind him just as he sobs over the newspaper for his parents' death, it's quite effective. This version of the origin adds a lot more depth to the proceedings. It shows more of the anger that Bruce has or had that he's working through. Even though the original version did showcase Batman's sadness, this new version really amps it up. And there are just some subtle changes that not all of them stay. In this version, Martha's not shot, but her heart gives out because it's just too much. But on the plus side, she's named in this one. And there's a connection between Chill and Bruce as they make eye contact. And it's just something in the child's eyes, just the rage and pain there. Chill can't kill him, and they just kind of imprint on each other. Stop looking at me like that. Something about young Bruce's eyes made the killer retreat. They were accusing eyes that memorized his every feature, eyes that would never forget. This moment with the eyes would become a staple, making its way into many retellings. This update also places more emphasis on the justice level of the crusade. The killer was never found, and soon after, a young lad made a grim promise. It's a promise now, we've been lightly downgraded. Vow is more intense. I swear I'll dedicate my life and inheritance to bringing your killer to justice and to fighting all criminals. I swear it. But this story gets really dark. It's written in the Golden Age, and so some may have a hard time accessing it from that angle, but there's just something really visceral about it. He gives this speech, and it still holds up. Presently, Batman calls on Joe Chill.
Chill, I want to tell you a story without an ending. Maybe you can supply it. It began some years ago in Gotham City, when Thomas Wayne, his wife, and young son Bruce were stopped by a bandit.
You said Wayne?
The bandit killed Thomas Wayne. His wife died from shock. Frightened, the cowardly killer ran away, but not before young Bruce Wayne memorized his features.
No one would believe Wayne's identification accurate after all these years. You're bluffing. Besides, how do you know what really happened?
I know because I am the son of the man you murdered. I am Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, Batman Brave and the Bold adapted this and pulled in some other things like a Silver Age story and also the Untold Story Origin of Batman. That was a readaptation of this years later. But they kept that speech largely the same, and it's so chill. It's so good. I was about to say chilling, and then it sounded like a pun. This origin cements Chill as an important part of Bruce's trauma. It's something that haunts him and something that he has to push against. Chill still gets a fairly horrific death because he's seen Bruce's face. This is the Golden Age. He can't live. For Chill, he runs out to the gangsters just sputtering about what's happened and Batman and how he killed his parents and all this stuff. And so the gangsters turn on him, blaming him for them having to deal with Batman, and they gun him down. It's pretty intense. Chill in this is also more firmly established as a career criminal. But there's still not really a reason given here outside of him being a hoodlum. It's still basically random. Wrong place, wrong time. Don't walk down dark alleys. Even though it's not really said that it's a dark alley specifically. That's another detail that's come up over time. This change though, Batman having this strong emotional connection to Chill, in some ways it adds layers to him. It focuses the anger that he feels. It gives him a bit of a focal point while also still leaving that general kind of trauma intact. In some ways, it could be seen to reinforce the base, although his origin would still work if he didn't know who Chill was. But this just being a thing that happened would not remain. Enter, surprisingly enough, the Silver Age. Known for shenanigans, aliens, and oft-times other outlandish happenings that were perpetrated by the rise of the Comics Code, necessitated. Joe Chill gets revised in this era, and Thomas gets expanded upon. For this connection, we need to look at Detective Comics 235 from 1956. This is also the issue that shows Bruce's father wearing a Batman costume that shifts some of the inspirational weight off of that bat flying through the window. Its wings can be lightened. This story was the first Batman, and it was also written by Bill Finger. Can't leave the origin alone, he's got ideas. This story also bears some similarities to what seems to be being set up in Detective Comics 1090. In 235, Bruce and Dick are surprised to find an old Batman-style costume in the attic. This makes Bruce question everything. Then that means your father was a Batman before you.
But that's impossible. I was the first Batman. I adopted the first Batman costume years after I saw my parents killed by a robber.
Bruce's thoughts whirl back to when he was a boy and made a promise to the memory of his parents. I vow that I'll dedicate my life to bring your killer to justice and to fight all crime. Note that now the vengeance element has pretty much been eradicated from the proceedings. And also they're really hammering home that it's not just about him, it's about everybody. This story also lightly retcons what happened with Joe Chill in the previous origin retelling. Now Batman saw Joe Chill, but then he was just shot down by some rival mobsters. There was none of the identity reveal or Batman's crisis or his chilling, this time the pun is intended, demise. Bruce finds some footage and also his father's diary, and this jumpstarts some memories and we get to see what really happened. He learns that this was a costume for a masquerade ball and that he must have remembered his father wearing it and so adopted the symbol. Now his father was kidnapped at this masquerade by a gang who wanted to perform some surgery. He's just that good.
The gunman took me to an old warehouse where their boss was in hiding. You're Lou Moxon, the bank robber the police are after.
Yeah, one of them winged me. I want to remove the slug, see?
I knew that once I removed the bullet, Moxon would never let me live to reveal his whereabouts to the police. I've got to do something. But what? I suddenly hooked one foot around Moxon's chair and...
What?
That left only two hoodlums to deal with. I'll let the police take over from here.
So it is that Moxon swears vengeance and hires Joe Chill as a hitman. Here, the diary ends.
This means Joe Chill only pretended to be a hold-up man. Actually, he was Moxon's hired killer. Moxon must have ordered Chill not to kill me, too. So I'd be alive to testify that my parents were killed by robbers.
So there seems to be some elements here potentially of where 1090 could veer, in that Thomas Wayne is more directly involved in what happened to them in that alley. He's more of a catalyst. This places Bruce's tragedy less in the random happenstance category and more in the a thing that could only have happened specifically to him, because there's a whole underbelly and conspiratorial realm that's being entered there, which does slightly undermine his relatability, as now not only is he in a subject positioning that some have a harder time identifying with, but his origins are more complicated and specific. Although some argue that this is more interesting and it adds a generational hero aspect in that Bruce was inspired by his dad, that he comes by those traits honestly. Others feel that it's just unnecessary. It's adding, but not enhancing. Moxon also comes to a grisly end. It meets code standards because he's a criminal, but Batman dresses up in his dad's old costume to get a confession out of him, and Moxon thinks it's a ghost, and he's so terrified he runs in front of a truck by accident and he's killed, but not before he confessed. Case closed. This story is also flirting with Thomas's dedication to his oath, but not so much. That's gonna come more later, but it is something that's also been explored. There have been lots of different explorations of Thomas, some where he's less savory. For example, at time he struck Bruce and was gonna sell short on stocks. But if you're looking for specifically him really holding to his oath, you can jump down post-crisis to The Long Halloween. That ran from 1996 to 1997. And there you have Thomas choosing to save Carmine Falcone because his father, Vincent Falcone, begged him to, even though the Falcones are mobsters. He does refuse the payment that's offered though, saying basically that he would do the right thing but he doesn't want to be involved in any of the mafia type stuff. Now this doesn't end up factoring into Joe Chill killing them, but it is used to have Bruce question whether his father should have let Carmine die. Would Gotham have been better off? It's a more indirect way of asking the question that's been stated outright in 1090. Are there some people that should be left to die? Would the world be better off? And who has the right to make that choice? And what kind of impact does that have on Bruce and the way he approaches being Batman? So there is a precedent already for, do Thomas Wayne's ideals harm his family? And how has that shaped Batman? 1090 could be combining that with the Joe Chill element, which has also had a lot of fluctuation. Pre-crisis, it's affirmed he did it. It was him. point him out in the lineup. But they also played around with just adding details, just cuz. He had a brother at one point, Max Chill, who I love because of his name. Now that would be a deep cut. Ooh, can you imagine? It's Max Chill and they're twins. It was never Joe, it was Max. I need to be stopped. Nobody take any of these ideas seriously. There was a period also where the mother of Max and Joe, who had changed their name to Chilton, was a housekeeper who helped raise Bruce. This was during the whole Bruce was being raised by Uncle Phil era. Never forget Uncle Philip. He also popped up in the New 52. The 1980s retold the Golden and Silver Age stories under Len Wein in The Untold Legend of Batman. They remained fairly similar, but they were grittier and there was more anger there, and they really leaned into the Lou Moxon kind of connection. Post-Crisis, there was the famous retelling in Batman Year 1, but Joe Chill featured really heavily in Year 2, which is much less talked about. That doesn't really deal with the origin, but it has Batman and Joe Chill have to work together, and so he's working through his feelings in that way. There was a whole thing where Joe Chill died, and then his son, Joe Chill Jr., took on the mantle of a serial killer, the Reaper, for vengeance. Year 2 and its fallout was a time, but it was an example of how if you leave Chill alive and the different interactions they can have, how that can change things. Joe Chill Jr. did witness an abusive relationship between his mother and father, so abusive Joe Chill is also not a new element. Maybe we'll see a play on Joe Chill Jr. in the latest update. Joe Chill Jr. also had a sister who was placed up for adoption, so there are lots of little threads that could potentially be pulled upon. Now, Zero Hour briefly flirted with the idea that maybe Joe Chill didn't kill his parents. In Detective Comics 678, Batman ends up visiting another world, where he died that night and not his parents, and neither of them became either a hardened Batman or the Joker. It was great. They were just sad. Really, really sad. It's not great for them. Batman in this issue is so caught up in this that he goes out and seeks vengeance for their pain and ends up finding that in this world it wasn't Joe Chill, that Joe Chill was on some kind of drug bender and so couldn't have done it. And this leads him to not only miss the time he could have spent with his parents in this universe connecting with them, but also causes him to question whether it was Joe Chill in his world either. Ultimately, he decides that whether or not it was Joe Chill, it doesn't change what happened and who he became. So it's kind of almost a reversion all the way back to the golden age of maybe it doesn't matter, it could just be anybody. That's not the point.
The doubt is still there, even if it were an illusion. There is the uncertainty. Is it possible that I never brought their killer to justice? And in the end, does it matter? Does that make a difference in what I do? No, it does not.
You see, that's why it matters that Joe Chill was a criminal, because otherwise he would have just pursued some random innocent man. All of this is to say there is a lot of playing around that's been done with Thomas Wayne, with Joe Chill, with the origin over the years. But a lot of it sometimes is ignored or falls by the wayside or gets rolled back into the classic origin and not overly discussed, because that's the one that still stands paramount. But you have all these little things that have floated around. What movie did they see? It's Zorro. Did Bruce ask them to walk down that alley? Did the Court of Owls kill his family? Was his father loving or distant? All these things have been played with to varying degrees and have had different impacts, some large, some very small. The smaller ones seem to be the ones that have stood more the test of time, however. So what about this latest time of recording, start of a shift? Does it hurt the character? Improve it? Some of that will depend on the details and how it plays out, but we can talk about some of the potential based on what's been presented. As it stands, it could be falling more into the change for change's sake category. Details and embellishments, but not necessarily growth, although it could get there. But much of what is being worked through is already part of Batman lore. Bruce already has a complicated relationship with his father, and his father has already impacted how he performs being Batman. Both his parents have. He's been inspired by them, he lives in the shadow of them in some ways because of their death and because of the quasi-idolized version he has of them. There's just a lot of things going on there. But they are a large part of what he does. And his father, being a doctor specifically, was also already an influence. This so far is just being far more direct about saying how and trying to introduce this kind of dramatic conflict. Side note, there's no reason for Thomas to call him Joe Chill here and not Joseph Chill. Thomas seems kind of stiff and formal, so the use of the nickname is for audience familiarity. It's more legasp if you say Joe Chill versus Joseph Chill, or even worse, Joseph Chilton. As for the chill factor, that would depend on whether or not Bruce knows that it was Joe Chill his father saved, and what kind of role Joe plays and how he comes to kill them. If he does, maybe that's the twist. Come on, Max reappearance. Even if that happened, it would still depend on whether Bruce knew or not, because him knowing why his parents were killed makes it less a general mission, because it becomes more specific to him. It becomes less a crime happened, and so I'm going to try and make sure it doesn't happen to anybody else, not just me, make the world safer for all, because it's not fair and somebody needs to do something and he has the means to do something. And instead it becomes something more specific that could have happened to his family only because of the circumstances. It potentially could overcomplicate things. Sometimes the simplest versions are best, and sometimes the best versions are the first ones. Not always, but sometimes. It depends. Mileage varies. There's always a bit of a difficulty when it comes to adding to Batman specifically because his origin was already so strong from the start. Although some may disagree that it's strong. If so, please share below. Now, if Bruce doesn't know that this was the man his father saved, then there is some pathos to be mined there. A whole, did his father's ideals cost him his life, and what does that trickle down for Bruce, and how is that going to interconnect with the fact that he is now getting older? Because you have this going up against the plot of, oh, how am I going to keep being Batman? I've got pain and all kinds of things. So it'll be interesting to see how those things are reconciled with each other. It may be through the child that Martha was able to save. I'm really hoping it's not going to be some kind of secret villain reveal of that. Now, all of this is not to say that one shouldn't play with an origin, or that they can't, because some changes happen for the better, and more still might be. Some of the details that have been added have become iconic. The pearls falling, never forget the falling pearls. And there are some interesting things you can play with say Joe being dead versus Joe being alive. Is it more compelling to have Batman have that closure denied and a bit of mirror of his parents' death, or is it more interesting to have him have to work through Joe Chill being alive? So there are definitely different ways to view and play with things, but depending upon how one plays with them, it could lead to a slightly or very different Bruce, and that can then trickle down to being a different Batman, and the question is how far can one go with that before it becomes too far off base? It remains to be seen how this will play out. As it stands, it feels a bit contrived in terms of execution. The dilemma comes across as a bit forced, and it's trying very, very hard to hit one with that emotional impact. At points, it almost comes across as working from the reveal backwards. There are some ways that this may have had a different impact. For example, if the Joe Chill reveal had been a bit earlier, there could have been more of a sense of dread in the reader, as the reader already knows who that is. And it could have lent some weight to the argument that was happening, because that would be hanging over it. But then one wouldn't have gotten that gasp moment. I'm curious if to make it less direct of a through line, they'll have Chill manage to kill the girlfriend or child or both, and also the Waynes, or do something entirely different. Although again, depending upon how everything plays out, it may not end up having that much impact. So it remains to be seen whether or not this is going to fall into one of those making Bruce less relatable scenarios or not. And for some, all of this is just going to depend on how entertaining it is. Are we not entertained? One of the things this did remind me of a lot was the manga and anime Monster. Is anyone familiar with that? That's the one where the doctor makes the decision that he's going to save a child versus saving an important individual, and then he feels that he's made the correct moral choice, and it turns out that the child, this is not a spoiler because this happens in the first few episodes or issues, is a serial killer. Very good. Would recommend. I'm trying really hard to imagine how this could play out and be lore breaking. Joe Chill goes to kill them, collapses as he's about to, and Thomas is so obsessed with his oath that he resuscitates him and then gets shot. For me, I can say I'm intrigued, and I'm also curious as to whether Bruce is going to go for those enhancers again. It never works out for him. Who else remembers the idiot route as well? That barely worked out for him. On changing origins, I get why people are drawn to it. It can be interesting, and also many on the creator side may want to shape a character. And with so much legacy and history, there's always the question as to how does one do that? Going back to the origin point with a new reveal can be a go-to. But at this point, unless there's something really salient to extrapolate on or explore, is it worth it? Or is it more for the shock value? Which, if it's not character damaging, can be a lot of fun. Now we'll have to see how this goes. Maybe it'll be really cool and then we'll be back here to talk about it more. I sure hope so, because there were lots of parts of this issue that I didn't get to, both good and bad. There was a mild Hal Jordan jab in there. Well, all lanterns, but we know Bruce meant Hal. He likens his ring to being an enhancement. However, in general, when it comes to Batman's origin, the trend seems to have been towards favoring simpler versions. And it's these base moments that tend to stick with people. I tend to prefer a simpler origin, let Batman's trauma rest, and also in many ways in canon he's moved past it, so sometimes it feels like dragging him a bit back when it's brought up again. But I'm also always curious to see how people add to it and why. I'm part of the problem. But all of these are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. How do you feel about Batman's origins? Do you like when people change it? Are you intrigued to see where this is going? What changes do you feel have added to it? Do you feel that they're ones that have taken away? What's your fave? Are you like me, just hoping for Max Chill and some puns? A shocking Max Chill reveal. I need to be stopped. Please share your thoughts down below. While you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.